The sun was setting over Pine Ridge, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and lavender. Henry Moore sat alone on his creaky porch swing, the old wooden boards groaning beneath him. His eyes, heavy with years of memories, rested on a faded photograph lying on the side table, a young boy in a worn jacket, with eyes full of hope that seemed miles away now. He whispered to the empty air. 17 years old. Dropped out of high school. Thought I'd lost my chance. His voice cracked, carrying the weight of decades. Behind him, the house stood silent, the same way it had after Mary passed 2 years ago. He missed her laugh, her gentle voice telling him, "You're more than your mistakes." But for years he'd buried those words beneath the shame of a life half-lived. Tonight the summer breeze carried something else, a promise that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Pine Ridge was the kind of town where everyone's business was common knowledge, and stories traveled faster than the summer storms that rolled through the cornfields. Henry grew up here, the son of George Moore, a quiet World War II vet with a stern jaw and calloused hands. "School's important," George used to say. "But sometimes, life teaches lessons books can't." But for Henry, those lessons came too early. The classrooms felt cold, the teachers impatient. At home, George carried the invisible wounds of war, the kind that made him distant and hard to reach. His mother, Eleanor, tried to hold the family together, but the house always smelled of tension and silence. One evening in 1964, after a long day working at the factory, Henry sat at the dinner table, his heart pounding. "Son," George said, breaking the quiet, "if you're not cut out for school, you gotta find your own way. But you owe it to yourself to try." Henry met his father's eyes, full of unspoken pride and fear. That night, he made a choice, one that would shadow his life for decades. At 17, Henry packed a small bag and walked out of Pine Ridge High for the last time. The halls echoed behind him with laughter and promises, but none were meant for him. The air was thick with failure, the taste of regret bitter on his tongue. He found work at the local lumber mill, where the smell of sawdust and sweat was constant. The job was grueling, long hours, dangerous machines, and the kind of exhaustion that gnawed at the soul. But it paid the bills. Mary, his high school sweetheart, stood by him through it all. She worked as a nurse's aide, soft-spoken but fierce in her loyalty. One chilly autumn evening, Henry and Mary sat on the tailgate of his rusted pickup, the stars bright overhead. "You ever think about going back to school?" Mary asked, voice gentle. Henry shook his head, staring at the distant lights of Pine Ridge. "Too late for me. I've got responsibilities now." Mary reached over, squeezing his hand. "It ain't too late. Not for you." But Henry's silence was louder than any answer. Years rolled by, and Henry buried his dreams beneath the weight of everyday survival. He married Mary in a small church filled with close friends and family, their smiles hiding the quiet fears that lingered beneath the surface. Together, they raised Lisa and Tom, their children, bright and hopeful, the reasons Henry kept pushing forward. But life had a way of testing even the strongest hearts. In 1983, Mary fell ill. It started with fatigue, then grew worse, stealing the vibrant woman Henry loved. The hospital visits, the treatments, the endless waiting rooms, all of it became their new reality. Henry gave up overtime, took a second job cleaning the local school, anything to cover the medical bills. He hardly slept, his rough hands trembling from exhaustion. One night, sitting beside Mary's hospital bed, he whispered, "I'll fix this, Mary. I'll make it right." She smiled weakly, reaching for his hand. "You've already given me everything, Henry." It was in those long, sleepless nights Henry learned the true meaning of sacrifice and silence. The kind of quiet courage that no diploma could ever teach. It was a chilly morning in early 1990 when the mail arrived, heavier than usual in Henry's worn hands. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a crisp envelope with elegant handwriting, addressed to him. He hesitated before opening it, heart pounding as if it knew this was no ordinary letter. "Dear Henry," it began, "I hope this letter finds you well. It's been many years since you left Pine Ridge High, but you have never been far from our thoughts. We are launching a scholarship for non-traditional students, those who've faced life's harshest trials but hold on to hope. Harvard University is offering a program to help people like you fulfill their dreams. Henry's eyes blurred. Harvard? His fingers trembled. Dreams. Hope. Words he hadn't allowed himself to utter in decades. He sank into his chair, the room spinning. Was this a second chance, or just a cruel reminder of what he'd lost? Mary, sitting nearby, caught his gaze. Henry? What is it? He held up the letter, voice barely a whisper. Maybe it's time. Henry stared out the kitchen window, the letter resting on the table like a fragile promise. The idea of going back to school at 60 felt like stepping into a dream, one too big, too wild to catch. Who do you think you are, Henry Moore? He muttered to himself, his voice rough with doubt. A high school dropout chasing Harvard? The town had known him all his life, the kid who quit, the man who settled. What would his friends say? His children? Even Mary looked at him with a mix of hope and worry. But deep inside, something stirred. A flicker of the boy who once believed in more. That night, under the quiet hum of the ceiling fan, Henry filled out the application. Each word was heavy, each sentence a small rebellion against years of silence. I don't know if I'll make it, he whispered to Mary, who held his hand. But I'm going to try. Her smile was soft but fierce. You're not just trying, Henry. You're fighting. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotion. Henry waited anxiously for a response from Harvard, every knock at the door making his heart skip a beat. Doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. One afternoon, Henry's son, Tom, dropped by the farmhouse unannounced. Tom had always been practical, sometimes distant since Henry's long absence from ambition. Dad, Tom said, leaning against the doorframe. I heard about the letter. Are you serious? Henry looked up, surprised but cautious. I am. Tom shook his head, half smiling. You've been working your whole life, Dad. Why now? Because it's never too late. Henry replied softly. Because I owe it to myself. Tom's eyes softened. I guess. I'm proud of you. That moment, a small bridge over years of silence, filled Henry with a quiet strength he hadn't felt in decades. One rainy afternoon, Henry found himself in the attic, sifting through dusty boxes filled with forgotten memories. Old trophies, faded yearbooks, and a leather-bound journal, relics of a life paused. He opened the journal carefully, the pages yellowed and fragile. Inside, his teenage thoughts spilled out, dreams of becoming a writer, of making a difference. The boy he once was seemed alive again in the scrawled words. Tears blurred Henry's vision as he whispered to himself. You never really gave up on me, did you? The attic felt warmer somehow, like the past and present had folded into one. For the first time in years, hope wasn't just a word, it was a quiet companion, waiting to walk beside him. That night, Henry sat by the window, the journal open on his lap. The road ahead was uncertain, but his heart was clearer than it had been in a long time. The morning of his first Harvard class dawned cold and gray. Henry stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his worn jacket, his heart pounding like a drumbeat in a silent room. He felt every year, every mistake, pressed against his chest. What would the others think? Would he fit in among students young enough to be his grandchildren? At the campus cafeteria, he overheard whispers. Some curious, some skeptical. But then, he met Claire, a fellow non-traditional student, a retired nurse with a contagious laugh and stories just as heavy as his own. You're braver than you know, she said, handing him a coffee. It's not about fitting in. It's about showing up. Henry smiled for the first time that day, the warmth of connection breaking through his loneliness. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just in school, but in life itself. Classes were harder than Henry expected. The textbooks felt foreign, the pace relentless. But with every page, every lecture, he felt a spark reigniting, a hunger for knowledge long dormant. One evening, after a particularly tough exam, Henry sat on a bench outside the library. Claire joined him, their breaths visible in the cold air. "You're doing great, Henry. Don't let the struggle fool you," she said softly. Henry sighed. "I'm not just learning algebra or history. I'm learning who I am." Claire smiled. "Second chances aren't just about changing the past. They're about growing beyond it." That night, Henry realized the hardest lessons weren't in textbooks. They were in forgiveness, resilience, and hope. Just as Henry was settling into his new rhythm, life threw him another curveball. One crisp autumn afternoon, Henry received a call. Mary's health had taken a sudden turn for the worse. He dropped everything and rushed home, heart pounding with fear. Mary lay in bed, frail but smiling softly. "I'm proud of you, Henry," she whispered, gripping his hand weakly. "Keep going, for both of us." Tears streamed down Henry's face as he promised. "I will, Mary. I won't let you down." That night, alone in the quiet house, Henry wrestled with grief and guilt. But in his heart, a fierce determination grew, to honor Mary's faith by finishing what he'd started. Back on campus, Henry's world felt heavier without Mary's steady presence. Some days, loneliness wrapped around him like a thick fog. But then, unexpected kindness broke through. One afternoon, struggling with a tough assignment, Henry sat in the library, head in his hands. Claire noticed and sat beside him. "Need help?" she asked gently. Henry hesitated, then nodded. They worked side by side, laughter and frustration mingling in the quiet room. Later, a professor stopped by and offered extra tutoring. "We believe in you, Henry. Your story matters here." Those moments, small but profound, reminded Henry that kindness could change lives, that no one truly walks alone. One evening, as Henry left the campus bookstore, a familiar voice called out, "Henry Moore? Is that really you?" He turned to see Mr. Jenkins, his high school principal from decades ago, now retired but still sharp-eyed. "I heard about your journey," Jenkins said with a proud smile. "I always believed you had more to give." Henry swallowed hard, the ghosts of his past rising up. "Why did you reach out?" Henry asked. "Because sometimes life needs a second chance, Henry. And sometimes karma brings us back to where we started, to set things right." That night, Henry realized forgiveness wasn't just for others, it was for himself, too. After the meeting with Mr. Jenkins, Henry felt a stirring inside him, a longing to heal the distance that had grown between him and his children. One Sunday afternoon, Lisa and Tom came to visit. The house was filled with cautious smiles and unspoken memories. Lisa broke the silence. "Dad, we're proud of you. We never really understood why you left school, but now we see your courage." Tom nodded. "You've changed, Dad. We want to be part of this with you." Tears welled up in Henry's eyes. For the first time in years, the walls around his heart began to crumble. That day, family wasn't just about blood, it was about forgiveness, love, and second chances. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Henry took a walk through Pine Ridge, past the old diner where he had his first job, the playground where he and Mary once laughed, and the high school now bustling with new generations. The town hadn't changed much. The faces were different, but the spirit was the same: quiet resilience, hard work, and stories woven into every corner. He stopped by the Veterans Memorial, fingers tracing the engraved names. His father's name was there, a reminder of sacrifice and legacy. As the wind stirred the fallen leaves, Henry whispered, "This is where I come from, and where I'm going." Nostalgia wasn't just a memory, it was a guidepost for the future. Semester after semester, Henry pushed through. There were late nights filled with coffee and textbooks, early mornings battling fatigue, and moments when doubt clawed at his resolve. But then came the day that changed everything. Professor Daniels, known for his strict standards, called Henry to his office. "I've been watching your progress," Daniels said, his tone serious but warm. "You're not just a student, you're an inspiration. Your perseverance, it's remarkable." Henry's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sir. I never thought I'd hear that." The professor smiled. Keep this up. You're destined for more than you think. That day, Henry felt the weight of years lift, replaced by a quiet fire, proof that second chances could lead to extraordinary places. As Henry's graduation approached, a sudden opportunity arose. A local nonprofit sought volunteers to tutor struggling teens, many from broken homes, just like Henry once was. At first, Henry hesitated. His own journey had been painful, and reliving those memories was hard. But something inside him knew he had to give back. One afternoon, he met Jake, a restless 16-year-old with a chip on his shoulder and dreams buried beneath fear. "Why bother?" Jake asked, voice sharp. Henry looked him in the eye. "Because someone once believed in me. Because you deserve a chance." Slowly, Jake began to open up. Henry saw himself in the boy's struggles, the loneliness, the lost hopes. It was a reminder: kindness and justice ripple outward, sometimes in the smallest, most unexpected ways. The morning sun filtered softly through the windows as Henry adjusted his cap and gown. The auditorium buzzed with excitement, young faces brimming with promise, and a handful of older students like him, each carrying stories heavier than books. Lisa and Tom sat front and center, their eyes shining with pride. Mary's favorite scarf, now worn but cherished, was tucked safely in Henry's pocket. When his name was called, Henry's steps felt lighter than they had in decades. The applause was thunderous, not just for a degree, but for a lifetime of perseverance, sacrifice, and love. Taking the diploma in his hands, Henry looked out into the crowd and whispered, "This isn't just mine. It's for every second chance, every sacrifice, every quiet act of kindness." Tears streamed down his face as the past and future collided in that unforgettable moment. Back at the farmhouse, diploma framed and hanging on the wall, Henry sat in his favorite chair, a quiet smile resting on his lips. The road had been long, filled with heartbreak, doubt, and hard-won victories. He thought of Mary, of George, of Claire, and Jake, the people who had shaped this journey. Success wasn't just the degree. It was the courage to try, the grace to forgive, and the strength to keep moving forward. Henry picked up his old journal, now filled with notes and dreams anew. "Life isn't about where you start," he murmured, "but the courage to write your own story." The night was peaceful, the stars outside bright with possibility. Years later, Henry stood at the edge of Pine Ridge's community center, watching a group of teenagers gather for a storytelling workshop he'd started. The faces were young, curious, full of untold dreams, much like his own once were. He smiled, feeling the quiet hum of a life transformed. From dropout to Harvard graduate, from lost boy to mentor, he had become a beacon of second chances. "Remember," he told the group, "your past doesn't define you. It's what you do with your story that matters. Kindness, sacrifice, and hope, those are the true legacies we leave." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Henry felt the gentle embrace of time, a life full, a heart healed, and a future wide open. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.